So if my technology is telling me the truth, we are live on Zoom and we are live on Facebook Live, and that's at the @Wyndham Democrats Facebook page, if anyone would rather watch it there than on Zoom. So good evening to everyone who's joining us on either platform, or if you're watching this later on in the week, welcome to this debate. This is the first debate for the Democratic gubernatorial candidates. I am John Hagan. I am the chair for the Windham County Democratic Committee. And on behalf of the committee, I just want to say how excited we are to be hosting this debate tonight and welcoming all of you to this event. I would especially like to welcome our three individuals who will be seeking the nomination to the Democratic gubernatorial candidacy. Joining us tonight are Rebecca Holcomb, a resident of Norwich, a teacher, and the former Vermont Secretary for Education. Pat Winburn, a resident of Bennington and a practicing attorney, and David Zuckerman, a Heinsberg resident and farmer and the current Lieutenant Governor. So we have never done a debate before on Zoom, so bear with us, but here is the plan of how this will work. We are going to start with opening statements by each candidate. That'll be about 2 minutes each, and that'll be followed by questions in three areas: healthcare, education, and then economic development. We have a question that each of the candidates will answer. They will have 3 minutes to answer. And after that, there'll be a set of 1 minute rebuttal statements. After we've asked our question, we are going to be looking for a follow-up question from the audience, either from those of you on Zoom or those of you watching on Facebook Live. Please go ahead and put your questions into the comment or the chat box as appropriate. We have moderators on both of those, and they will feed the questions over to me so I can ask them to the candidates. Other than that, we will keep the audience muted for the entire event. Only the candidates will be on hot mics. That's just so they don't get interrupted. However, I would encourage you, if you're on Zoom, to use the reaction buttons, which has claps or thumbs up. Use the chat to share your ideas and thoughts as you're hearing the candidates. If you're on Facebook Live, the same thing. Go ahead and use the emoji reactions, or feel free to comment in the comment window beneath the Facebook Live. So, and with that, we decided we're going to do the order of the candidates for the opening and the closing the same, but it was going to be randomized. So I have my Scrabble tiles here, 3 of them, a P, an R, and a D. And so opening statement first will be David Zuckerman will start. That'll be followed by Patrick Winburn. And then Rebecca Holcomb will have the final opening statement. We will use that same DPR order for the closing statements as well. So, David, on that note, welcome to our debate, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you, Windham County Democrats, for organizing. And my first thing that came to mind when you said D, a P, and an R was the 3 major parties, but it's also our first initials. That's kind of a funny irony and synchronicity. As many of you are aware, I'm David Zuckerman. I'm your Lieutenant Governor. I also served in the legislature for 18 years in the House and the Senate. I'm a farmer, farm in the background behind me there, and a father, small business owner. And I am running to be your next governor, and I appreciate all of you coming to this Zoom discussion and debate as we look forward to putting a new governor in the office for January. I've been serving Vermont and the state I love for over 20 years. These last 4 as your Lieutenant Governor. I've met thousands of wonderful people, including many of you on this call, in my organizing around issues and working with you on many issues over those 20 years. I've met folks with incredibly diverse backgrounds at fairs, at Rotaries, at church suppers, and so forth. And it's really an amazing job as Lieutenant Governor to welcome people to the State House. And I really enjoyed doing that, bringing people in for my open coffee hours, no matter what their views on issues, no matter what issues important to them, to listen and really open up the process to Vermonters from across the state. And the reality is Vermonters are struggling. They were struggling before the COVID-19 epidemic. We had half the Vermonters living paycheck to paycheck. And that's actually been exacerbated, obviously, by this coronavirus pandemic, as well as the unemployment system, which was a complete fiasco for these last 6 to 8 weeks during the coronavirus issue. I'm hearing from Vermonters, particularly young Vermonters, but across all age spectrums, about the climate crisis. And I've been helping lead the efforts on that for many years in Montpelier, pushing for stronger policies, but we haven't had the leadership we need in Montpelier to really execute the policies we need to address the climate crisis. Older Vermonters need our help. Housing expenses are quite high. Medical expenses are high. Many homes aren't weatherized, and so even just basic utilities and staying warm and healthy is a challenge. So all of these are incredibly important issues to address as we are dealing with the economic and health fallout from coronavirus. Bottom line is not enough is being done. We've had a successful reactionary governor. He does the right thing when problems are presented, but he doesn't really do much to cut them off at the pass, to have a vision for Vermont, where we're going to go and how we're going to address the challenges that many are facing and will continue to face if we don't tackle them. For instance, we need to build an economy that puts Vermonters back to work, the jobs that pay enough for people to support themselves and their families and their homes, not living on the edge. We have to support our youth and take on the climate crisis, which will actually attract young people and families to Vermont. We need to expand healthcare access to all Vermonters, not just when we have a virus, but at all times, have universal healthcare. We can support our seniors by keeping them safe, especially in these situations, but also help them age safely and healthily in their homes rather than forcing them all into institutions that actually now we learn sometimes put them at greater risk. And we have to build more potentially affordable housing. All right, I'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Pat, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks, John, and thanks to the Windham County Democrats for hosting this Zoom meeting. I'm a husband, a father, and a Democrat, and I'm running because I want to see things get done. I lived in Manchester in Bennington County, and also now live in Bennington County. And we feel like we're sort of the lost kingdom down here in Bennington County. And I'm sure that a lot of people in Windham County feel that way too. I've been a trial lawyer for over 3 decades. I represent the powerless against the powerful. And I have learned a lot of things from dealing with the people and seeing juries in Windham County. Tried a lot of cases in Newfane, tried a lot of cases in federal court when the Brattleboro had a federal courthouse. And the things that I've learned, I think have made me the person that I am today. We need to do some things in the legislature, one of which is getting rid of Governor Scott. He's a nice guy. I'm sure he is a nice guy, but re-electing Governor Scott will be the same as re-electing Donald Trump. Governor Scott is a Trump Republican, and people say, well, he's a nice guy, but he is a nice guy, but he vetoed minimum wage. He vetoed family leave. He is not in the progressive Democratic mold that most people who are listening to this program are. And I think it's time to get rid of him. I'm sorry, but he needs to go. He's doing a fine job doing what he's doing now with the COVID virus calamity. But tomorrow's going to be a brighter day, and we're going to see some things change. And I believe that I'm the change agent that can help make them change for the better.
Thank you, Pat. And Rebecca, and by the way, one of the things we've discovered is you need all a notice. So when I just watch my screen, when I start waving the yellow book in the screen, that's your 30-second notice for wrapping up statements. Thank you. And Rebecca, the floor is yours. You're muted still. Hold on a minute. There you go. He's going to be having trouble with your mute.
Thank you, John. I'm not sure why that is. Thank you for hosting the first of our Democratic events. It's great to be here, and it's great to see so many of you from all over the state. I'm Rebecca Holcomb, a teacher, a mom, a small business owner, and Vermont's former Secretary of Education. I worked under 2 governors, and that's part of why I feel we need a new governor right now, and it's why I'm running for office. I've had the privilege of speaking with so many of you over the last couple months, and you make me confident about the future of this great state. It's been such a privilege to speak to Vermonters. You are also thoughtful about our challenges, and this is what you've told me. You've told me that COVID-19 changed us, and it changed this election. It left many of us scared, and it presented us with a whole world of uncertainty. It laid bare how much some Vermonters have to struggle just to make ends meet, and how our failures to lead in Montpelier have left Vermonters vulnerable across this state over the last 20 years. That's why this race will be about the next governor, and how that governor will keep people safe and confront our public health crisis while managing our economic recovery. And one of the hardest truths we have to face is that we likely won't be back to normal until we have a vaccine. The next governor will have to plan and implement a safe immunization program that protects Vermonters against the spread of COVID-19. That's so that those of us who've already been harmed most by COVID-19 and the resulting economic disruption don't continue to suffer sickness and hardship. Without this, our economy cannot return to normal. And in this first priority, Democrats in this primary have a very clear choice in this campaign. I will rely on long-established science and the best advice of experts in the midst of this public health crisis. I deeply respect David Zuckerman and his service to the state, and I'm sure that there's a lot that we agree on. But right now, nothing matters more than managing this public health crisis, and that's where we will have a fundamental difference of opinion. David Zuckerman used the word disputed to describe well-established science on the benefits of immunization. He said vaccines should be a matter of individual choice, even when that choice puts other people's children at risk. Public health experts aggressively disagree with this stance, and so do educators, and so do the vast majority of Vermonters. And in the midst of a pandemic, when it is so important that we replace Governor Scott, disputing the science behind immunization is both misguided and dangerous. It makes people scared of proven public health measures. As governor, I will put the safety of Vermonters first.
Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, as a reminder, we'll be doing questions in the areas of health, and that includes the COVID-19 virus, education, and economic development. I'll be asking the first question. Please feel free to, if you're listening or observing this on Facebook Live or on Zoom, to submit your follow-up question for the candidates, and you can do that in the comment box on Facebook Live or in the chat window on Zoom. So for the order on answering the first question, it'll be Rebecca, followed by David, and then by Patrick. And the first question is, pull it out here. COVID-19 has brought into full relief the range of challenges to our healthcare system in Vermont. What do you think is the most important challenge, and how would you address it? And you have 3 minutes, Rebecca. Did you hear that? Hold on a minute.
There you go.
Wow. Sorry about that.
I don't know why, but this isn't really working very well. Thank you for your patience on this. So first of all, thank you for this question to the Windham Dems. This is the single issue I've heard most about in all my multiple conversations with people across Windham County. COVID-19 created a terrible public health crisis, and we hear it from people who are afraid to go to the doctor because they're afraid they can't pay the bills. We hear it from people who say that a third of the revenue in their business goes immediately out the door to cover their double-digit increases in healthcare premiums. These are all Vermonters who want the dignity and respect of supporting themselves, but who are slowly being strangled by a healthcare system that is inadequate and too expensive. And as governor, my first job will be to make sure this never happens to them again. The first responsibility of government is to protect people when something terrible happens. And right now, that means fixing our broken healthcare system. We need universal affordable healthcare. No one running for the Democratic nomination for governor should be arguing against this in 2020. The question is, how do we get there? We could debate this for 2 hours, but here are just a few examples. First, our health through this crisis critically depends on payment reform, both to keep our providers out of bankruptcy and to keep people from getting sick in the first place. Back in 2015, the legislature did pass progressive legislation that required us to pay our hospitals and providers a fixed rate to keep us healthy in the first place, rather than paying providers only when we were terribly sick. But Governor Scott has dragged his feet on this, and he even left money on the table from the federal government. But that's why, in the middle of this current crisis, our healthcare providers, who encourage people to do exactly what they should do, which is stay home so they didn't get sick, are now struggling to stay solvent and losing money hand over fist. That's not acceptable. Second, I will aggressively lead on developing our healthcare workforce, because this is a health issue, but it is also an economic development and opportunity issue. I spoke with a young woman who got 2 years of college credit and a credential as a licensed nursing assistant while still in high school in Vermont, using programs that we already have, who was going to go to work in an emergency room. Here's the thing, the cost of helping her get a nursing degree so that she can work in a Vermont hospital is less than the cost of hiring a temp to take the job she can't fill without that degree. We need to be investing in Vermonters and not paying people to move here from out of state. And finally, let's transform our state college system to give people the skills they need to be able to take these jobs. And finally, there's one more important issue that we absolutely have to mention. Our failure to confront bias and build strong safety nets and ensure good health outcomes for our most vulnerable Vermonters means they are paying the highest price to COVID-19. Here in Vermont, for example, our lowest earners are 3 times more likely to have underlying conditions like diabetes, and they are less likely to have medical leave and family leave, both of which were vetoed by Governor Scott. That's why when I am governor, I will work to take care of them and make sure that we provide opportunities to our most vulnerable, because that is good for us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. David, you were next.
Thank you, John. Let's start talking about let's start by talking about what healthcare is. It's a culmination. Excuse me. Yep. I thought you couldn't hear me for a second there. It's a culmination of healthy food,
No, we can hear you.
economic stability and security, housing, and education. Now, if you look at it, inequity is at the core of all of those areas of healthcare. It's all exacerbated by the COVID-19 crisis, but it isn't the beginning of it. Many of us have been known about this and been fighting for universal healthcare for a long time. This is not new. And the thing is, with COVID-19, we're seeing, of course, that people with prior health conditions are at higher risks. Many of those conditions were preventable. People with housing insecurity are also at much graver risk. Those who are houseless often live in tight encampments or shelters where their physical and mental health is clearly compromised and in jeopardy because of their situation. COVID-19 has again exposed and exacerbated that difficulty. Access to primary care is limited. Our governor proposed a budget to cut support for primary care providers in rural areas. We need a governor with vision who's going to invest in healthcare in our rural communities. Telemedicine is now provided, which is a good thing. We could use this to expand access in preventative and primary care. We need a universal system that looks at all of these issues and the costs and how we can achieve a more efficient and more universal system. We need more primary care docs, and also at your own hospital locally, Grace Coolidge, you looked at food systems and healthier food in the hospital. Well, we need healthier food to prevent healthcare issues, not just to then protect people while they're in the hospital. Now, I want to talk about the vaccines for a minute, because my opponent, I'd like to ask her to stop distorting my record with partial information on vaccines. Overall, attacking each other in general and especially with this false information and incomplete information, is not how we're going to beat Phil Scott. All three of us have to come together in unity at the end of this primary to take on the governor. And the best way to do that is to help boost each other, not to tear each other down. I did vote against the amendment, but then I voted for the bill. And I've said that before, but my opponents never called to verify and talk to me about that. I've also made it clear by introducing legislation for a mandatory vaccine around, now I can't remember what it is, of course, not COVID. In any case, I introduced legislation around the mandatory vaccine for HPV to protect young women. I have stated very clearly, and on my website, you can find information around COVID-19 and a clear statement about vaccines, including an interview with the American Academy of Pediatricians president here in Vermont around the importance of vaccines and vaccinations and herd immunity. So please visit my website for complete information rather than partial misinformation. It's incredibly important that when we have a vaccine for coronavirus, that we make it universally accessible and free. Because one of the big issues around vaccines is that people have to pay for them, and at $150 to $300 to $350 a piece, that is a concern for many struggling Vermonters. So I will trust the scientists when the vaccine comes out, whether it's to have the vaccine be for our most vulnerable Vermonters, whether it's seniors or folks with other health conditions, or whether it's everybody. And I will support the position of those medical professionals. So let's make sure we talk about the issues completely and talk positively about how we can beat Governor Scott and we can create an economy for all that tackles the climate crisis, rebuilds our rural communities, and invests in healthcare for all across the state. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Pat? The floor is yours.
I believe in healthcare for all. And 5 years ago, my wife was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And if she didn't have proper health care, she would be dead. And those are cold, hard facts. And, you know, it's a cold, hard truth that we need health care for all. My daughter has epilepsy. My daughter has undergone 2 brain surgeries. We need health care for all. If you don't have your health, then what do you have? You really don't have anything. And that's an important need and something that for Vermonters is a necessity. And I think that, you know, the pandemic has shown that there is a need for health care for all. And I think that Senator Scott, or Governor Scott, has you know, shown his stripes for, you know, what he's really in favor of. I think that, you know, he is a nice guy, but he has vetoed all of the important bills that had previously talked about. And I think that, you know, when you really get down to it, it's a matter of do we want another 2 years of a Trump, Scott government? And I don't think that we do. I think that what we need to do is to see that Governor Scott ends his term after this 2-year period. And I think that we would all be better off without those kinds of problems.
Thank you, Pat. So we will invite all the candidates, if you'd like to make a rebuttal, 1-minute rebuttal on this question before or about one of your opponent's positions. We'll go ahead and entertain those now.
John, I can go first if you'd like, if no one else wants to rebut. The belief that science doesn't apply is why, after a 30% rise in measles cases worldwide, including in countries where the measles virus had been thought to be eliminated, the World Health Organization last year declared the anti-vaccination movement as the top 10 health threat. This is a serious issue. This is not a political debate. I have worked in schools with children who are immunocompromised, and their ability to be in that school environment was dependent on other people taking long-established vaccines to keep them safe. Their safety depended on other people doing what public health indicated. Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman refers to vaccines as universally accessible and free. That is not the same as following guidance on making sure that people who enter environments where other people may be at risk or work in nursing homes are really taking the vaccines that prevent them from spreading disease to other people. I would just ask David Zuckerman if you would be willing to say that if there was clear public health advice from experts and a well-demonstrated vaccine, would you require that as an entry into a school environment?
Thank you. David?
Well, I didn't realize we were now asking questions of each other, but I think I made my point clear.
This is your rebuttal.
No, I understand that, but like I said, I actually voted for the bill in the end. I also have stated many times over that I support the legislation as is, which supports those mandatory vaccinations, and my opponent knows that. So I'm curious as to why she needs to ask it, given how well she does her homework on so many other things. The reality is we need to work together, and when people omit some information to try to strike political points, it's not how we're going to work together in the Vermont way to beat Phil Scott. The reality around healthcare is we need to invest in universal healthcare. We need to make these vaccines, both the mandatory ones need to be free, and if our medical professionals say we should make the coronavirus vaccine mandatory, I would support that. Folks know my track record. When I want to fight for something, I do it for years and years on end. I did that on GMOs. I've done it on the climate crisis. I've done it on minimum wage and marriage equality. You look at my track record on issues that I'm fighting for, I take those fights to the mat. And in the end, we make policies that Vermonters support. I made my battle on that issue. I lost that amendment, but I voted for the bill because that's what Vermonters want. And I appreciate the science behind vaccines, and I will continue to do so. Please feel free to visit my website, zuckerman4vt.com, visit the COVID-19 site, and you can learn anything else you need to.
Thank you. Pat, did you have a statement you'd like to make? 1 minute rebuttal.
Well, the only statement I would make is that Franklin Delano Roosevelt's polio was cured by Dr. Salk and his invention of the Salk vaccine. And the Salk vaccine, when I was a kid, it was a real fear that people were worried that if they walked into puddles, or it was sort of the fear of the unknown, that they would end up spending a lifetime not being able to walk. And so vaccines are, of course, real. They are scientifically proven, and everybody should have their children vaccinated. And there really shouldn't be any disagreement about that.
I agree.
Thank you. So we had a follow-up question from Beth. Given that all of you agree we need healthcare for what changes, let me start that again. Given that you all agree that we need healthcare for all, what changes would you make at the heart of the Vermont healthcare system, specifically One Care Vermont and the Green Mountain Care Board? And we'll go in the same order since this is the same group of questions. So Rebecca, you'll be first. Hold on.
I think I'm unmuted now. Thank you. So I'm sorry, can you say that again? I was trying to type you to tell you you'd have to unmute me.
Given that you all agree that we need healthcare for all, what changes would you make at the heart of the Vermont healthcare system, specifically One Care Vermont and the Green Mountain Care Board?
Well, I think we need to go beyond that. I think that I'm going to go back to some of the things I mentioned earlier. Making successful change is going to depend on getting the cost of healthcare under control. And the first place we need to start is with payment reform. We need to make sure that we are paying people prospectively to keep people healthy so that people don't get sick and then go in and get expensive treatments that we all end up paying for in our shared healthcare system. We also need to take on our healthcare workforce and make sure that we have good primary care and good doctors and good nurses in our system so that we aren't hiring temps from out of state who go back where they came from and cost 2 to 3 times as much. That will make our costs come down so that we can begin to think about moving to universal care. And so it's those first steps that put us on the track towards universal care that is where I'm going to start. We also need to look at, I think, putting together a pilot that takes out the middleman, takes out the insurance, where people pay prospective payments directly to hospitals for the care they need. This is sort of like Kaiser Permanente. It's a well-functioning model that exists in California and Utah. It's something we need to do. We also ought to be starting multi-state consortiums to bargain for drugs, because we have to beat down the cost of pharmaceuticals. When we bring down that cost, it will be easier to shift, and we will have a model for how we move to universal care.
Thank you, Rebecca. David, your thoughts on this question?
Sure. When I was supporting universal health care in the legislature, it was clear that many of the businesses that provide universal health care actually pay more money for their health care plans for their employees than they would if they just faced the payroll tax that the Shumlin administration was working with. And I met with a company recently that is now working collaboratively with other businesses in Chittenden County to create health clinics for their workers, free health clinics, so that they get primary care far earlier, anytime they start feeling sick. And they thought it was going to take 3 years or more to get a return on their investment. And they saved more money in their first year than they spent on the program. We can save a tremendous amount of money by going to a universal health care system, removing the insurance companies from the equation, and actually investing in primary care for Vermonters to reduce the extreme costs in the emergency room and elsewhere in our hospital system. We also have to invest in primary care so that, again, not just this business sponsored ones, but if the state did this all across the area, we would encourage business development throughout Vermont. Many people get insurance through their employer and are too afraid to go be the entrepreneur they could be to start small businesses in Vermont. That's the economic engine of Vermont, and we're holding it back by not having a universal healthcare system. The One Care Board and so forth, they've had over $100 million to start investing in this system. If we invested that in the transition to a universal healthcare system, I think we would have made more progress. And we need to start looking at how that money is being spent and use it more effectively.
Thank you, David. Patrick or Pat?
Well, I'm a Main Street lawyer. I'm not a Wall Street lawyer. And I run a mom and pop type law firm in downtown Bennington. And the people that we employ are all covered with full health insurance that is fully paid for by my law firm. One of my employees has recently found that she was pregnant. And she is fortunate that she has health coverage through my mom and pop shop because if she didn't, she would have a lot of problems. And, we cover everybody in our law firm from whatever problems that they have. And we think that healthcare for all, that emphasizes why healthcare for all is so important.
Okay. Any other follow-on thoughts on this before we move on to the next topic? Very good. So our next topic is on education. The order for answering the questions will be Patrick, then David, then Rebecca. Pat, the question is, Act 46 has resulted in towns in Windham County losing control over their local school budgets. The intent of the act was to lower education costs and provide equity in services across the state. What aspects of Act 46 do you think should be revisited and why? And how would your proposed changes address the growing need for services beyond education that support our students?
Well, Act 46 is something that we really need to hit the pause button on now. There is a need for local control, and there is a need for people to feel that they are not being left behind. But because of the virus, we need to hit the pause button. I've been talking to teachers and parents and to additional who do not need additional pressures on administrators right now. Now that the pandemic now that we have the pandemic, it's not the the time to really move forward on this issue. But we need to preserve the past. School is the hub where we vote. I'm not a Republican, but I believe that communities need local control. And there was a recent Bennington Banner article that spoke very eloquently on this subject on May 5th that I would recommend that everybody look at. You know, there are other issues too that have to be dealt with. My wife was given a free lunch. There is no such thing as a free lunch, but you know, for kids, it's something that is a very important thing when they are compared to each other and looked down on because they are given a free lunch. I believe that under my administration, there would be free lunch and free breakfast. And I think that that's a necessary component to the proper education of our children who are our future.
Thank you, Pat. David?
Well, thank you. It's important to remember Act 46 was legislation that was put together between both the legislature and the administration. I served on the Education Committee when it was written, and Rebecca Holcomb was Secretary of Education at the time. And we worked collaboratively to actually put that bill together. In the committee, we did a process whereby we also heard from communities that felt that the system of forced mergers would actually hurt their students and would hurt their community's ability to provide the education they were at the affordable price that they were doing so. So we wrote an alternative structures measure into the bill. And we thought that 25 to 30 communities, including some of those down in Windham County, would qualify for those alternative structures, whereby if you were meeting the economic threshold of expenses for the state and you were meeting the outcome goals for the state, you would not be required to merge if you could show there were geographic or challenging differences to merging with your neighbors. Not all of that was implemented when the law was put into effect, but that was the collaborative approach that the legislature, the administration, and folks from your neck of the woods put into that bill to protect those communities. I do think there was a little bit of misunderstanding with respect to the ability to just vote no on mergers and have that be what would then be carried out. But if no votes were made in towns that were going to be merging with a proposal by those local school boards, they then had to write that alternative structure proposal and put that in. And many of your communities did. It's just that the administration and the State Board of Education didn't end up accepting those. That's an issue that needs to be addressed. We also need to understand why some of those appeals, most of those appeals, were not accepted, except for the one up in Stowe, Elmore, and Morristown. Stowe got an out. I don't know why. That's something that we have to explore further. It's important to remember that the driving costs of education are around social services. Many of our small district schools were doing a great job with the diversity of education and the opportunities for their kids. But throughout small and large districts, social service costs are mounting in our schools as kids come in from the challenges of income and other challenges in their homes. We need to look at ways to shift our school mindset from not just being an education center with a pathway to college that many can't afford, nor one that just says you're going to become a robot in our production systems, but a system of education that makes well-rounded individuals who are solid, critically thinking individuals who can move from business or economic sector to economic sector, because people don't stay in the same job for 40 years anymore. We also need to look at making our schools into community centers, because the reality is many kids get their health care or could get their health care. Many kids might get their state supports. Many families could get their supports in these community centers. We could bring more seniors into our schools with their elder and wisdom to help with our kids. We could make them more multi-generational. We need to move towards a community school model that's funded by broad-based taxes by the state and not keep burdening our education fund with property taxes that makes it harder for some small communities to afford an education for their kids. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Rebecca.
Thank you. So one of the most important jobs government has is to make sure that we aggressively create and defend opportunities to give kids upward mobility. And that's what our school boards do and what our public schools do in Vermont. And it's our most important investment. I want to just start by thanking the people in Windham County who have spoken to me on these issues on the phone, in your living rooms, and that was before COVID-19 and more recently on Zoom. One of the strengths in so many parts of our state is the very high levels of community engagement around our schools. As Pat said, it's where we come to vote, it's where we come to eat, it's where we break bread. And these are at the heart of our communities. But we also have to acknowledge that we've had a tough couple of years. Windham County has lost a lot of students. It's lost a college. You're down about, I think, 1,600 kids in your schools from 25 years ago. And as David mentioned, you're dealing with new social pressures, from the opiate epidemic to rising levels of poverty in many of our schools. Act 46 didn't create the problems. It did provide some schools and some districts and some communities with tools to provide a better and brighter and more resilient future. Was it a perfect law? Of course not. And as David said, at the time, there was this alternative structure that was an option. And actually, David, you also sponsored a bill to take out what you thought were some of the problems in Act 46. But always, we have to work, and we have to acknowledge that different communities have different needs. And right now, I know that many of the communities in Windham County are in the first year of merging. What we need to be doing, and what I will do as governor, is work with you directly to hear what's working, what's not working, and to problem solve, because you may need different opportunities. We also do need to be realistic, however. Because of COVID-19, we are already looking at a state budget gap that is closing in on $500 million in the next year. In 2017 and 18, the districts that we saw that were best able to contain costs while protecting their children were the bigger districts. That means, as governor, I will have to work more closely with small districts because they are less resilient, and they are likely to be less resilient in the face of COVID-19. We also have to look at ways to work together to create better opportunities. And I'll just give you one example, because there is hope and there are opportunities if we can commit to working together. On the other side of the state, there's some small districts that have refilled their schools by partnering with childcare to put kids in their buildings. They saw the schools were empty. They have nurses on site already. They have healthcare. So they have libraries on site. They have food on site. And by bringing in our youngest children, ages 0 to 5, they're able to help families. I talked to one mother. Last year, she spent $185 a year. This year, she spent $185 a week on childcare. This year, it's $50 a week. Just think about this. What would Vermont look like for our young families if we left $135 a week in their pockets? That would be game-changing, and it would make Vermont a place that young families would want to live.
Okay. Let's see, we are waiting to get a question from the audience, and we have a few here. So I'm going to pick one that I've heard a lot about, so we'll go with it. Is on top of Act 46, we now see rural communities further having to deal with the improper weighting of pupils. I'd like to hear your thoughts on how you would respond to that. And we'll go in the same order we did with the first education question. So Pat, this goes to you first.
Well, I think that the area where I live and a lot of the listeners live, the Act 46 has impacted them a great deal. But we feel that the people in Chittenden County and Montpelier have an unfair advantage over the people in our region. It seems that everything that is decided by people in Chittenden County, and that's where the money goes. And Montpelier does the same thing. We need to have school reform and school education and consolidation, but it can't really be at the expense of the people, like the people that are in my region of Vermont.
Okay.
Well,
David. Yeah.
Well, I think there's a lot of factors at play here. I think Southern Vermont has one of the greatest opportunities to turn around the demographic trend of losing populations if we did actually invest in broadband, which I've been talking about for years, including sequestering some of the Trump tax cuts to make that investment. Now we fortunately might have the opportunity to use the COVID-19 money to expand broadband, the final $250 to $300 million it would take to all of the nooks and crannies of Vermont, so that we would actually attract young families with the opportunities to develop their economic futures and repopulate our schools. So that, first of all, would help with some of the numbers issues, which would help with some of the financing issues. Secondly, there is a bill in the legislature that deserves a good look that would actually shift some of the weighting protocols that would help many of those small towns and smaller districts. So I think it's important to tackle this from multiple angles. No one solution is going to solve all of these challenges. When you think about it, looking at community schools and investing in them from the state level, using some of that state money that Pat talks about, that goes to one part or another state. What we need to do is put it into our schools and into our school systems as local human services hubs. I think the childcare idea is a great one as well. And invest in these schools so that you have the resources to meet the needs of the kids. I saw a lot of statistics back when I was in the legislature around the cost of one small district with 200 students. If it went up by 7%, it was a drop in the bucket as far as dollars in the overall education budget of the state. So you're right, you don't deserve to be punished for investing in your kids.
So first of all, thank you. Representative Zott is absolutely correct that our funding formula currently doesn't adequately account for the cost of educating students who live in poverty, students who are learning English as a second language, and students who live in very isolated areas, particularly in our rural communities. When the legislature first asked for that weighting study, we were the ones who suggested that, that we didn't have the capacity to do it at the agency. We knew what it would say, and we were determined that it be done well, because if it was not done well, and it was not done by a third party who was well respected and unimpeachable in terms of the integrity, nobody would have taken it seriously, and they would have dismissed it as a partisan document. That's why I pushed back against the legislature when they tried to get it done for nothing and get it done on the cheap and with people who didn't have good skills. So what I did is push back to have that was the last thing I did before I left. I helped write the RFP that got that study done. And sure enough, what it shows is that we need to rethink how we fund students who cost more to educate. And those are students, again, in isolated communities, students who are learning English and may need extra help to catch up, and students who are living in poverty. And what the study says is that we should change not so much how we raise, but look at how we allocate resources so that we give out grants in bigger blocks for communities that have more expensive to educate kids. I came out and supported that. There's a statement on my website at RebeccaHolcomb.com if you'd like to see what I said about it at the time. I put it out in January, and you can go look at the news link on my website and see my advocacy for that issue. And we do provide David, you're absolutely right. We have many schools, particularly the early mergers, I gotta say, are the ones who are now putting health clinics into their schools and putting childcare into their schools and looking at how they can partner with social service agencies to provide better access to some of those things. So that's it. And I see right now somebody asked why I left my job as Secretary of Education during Act 46. I'll tell you, part of the problem is we had a governor who 2 years in a row undid budgets after communities had voted on them, and we had people voting on budgets. I don't think there's anything more sacred in a democracy than your right to vote, and I didn't feel like in good faith I could negotiate with school boards when we'd had that situation.
Thank you, Rebecca. So also building off of a question from the chat board, Rich asks, as governor, what plans would you put forth to maintain and enhance the enrollment and the quality of the Vermont State College system? So Pat, if you'd like to go ahead and start on that one.
Well, we have seen the demise of the technical schools, or at least attempted demise of the technical schools up in the Northeast Kingdom area. And that really sets a bad example and a bad process for what our students in Vermont need. Vermonters need technical education. A lot of the things that we think that we do really need this type of support and this kind of help. And without the proper funding for the technical schools and for the colleges, it's really our students are at a loss, and the state is really the loser in that kind of circumstance.
David.
Sure. I have to say in my 20+ years of service, I've never seen as quick an organic growth of concern around an issue in the state of Vermont as I saw when word came out that there was a proposal to close those 3 campuses. Within a week, there were 30,000 signatures on petitions to keep them open. I think it's critically important for the economy of the area, but also for the future for our young Vermonters to keep those 3 institutions open. I think we need to fund them better. We also need to look at their strengths and accentuate those. About 20 years ago, it was moved that they would all be sort of equal liberal arts with a little bit of focus. We need to take those focal areas and really elevate them so we can draw people to these institutions, both Vermonters and out-of-state enrollment, which historically we've been seeing drop. But I think we have a real opportunity in the current moment to attract young people to the state. A recent Harris poll showed that 39% of urban dwellers are considering moving to a more rural area after the COVID-19 crisis. The governor's getting a lot of credit for his handling of the crisis, and he deserves that, except for the fact that some of it is naturally would be occurring anyway in terms of our low rates when you look at rural areas all across the country. People are going to want to move here. So let's create an educational opportunity for them and attract young people to our state colleges in an era when there are fewer young people across the country going compared to what exists out there for opportunities. We can draw those people from Boston, Connecticut, New York to attend, which will increase enrollment dollars. We can focus on areas like nursing and other areas where we need employees in Vermont. We can partner with businesses to do enrollment internships that can help finance our institutions and create the employees that those local businesses need and want. There's a lot of creativity out there. I've been working with people in these last couple of weeks all across the state, particularly in the northern and eastern regions, to come up with those creative ideas. And I look forward to continuing to work with them, as I have on many issues in the past, to create solutions that work for Vermont, not just a top-down approach.
Thank you, David. Rebecca?
Thank you. This is another one of those issues where we show up too late and say how terrible it is. Anyone who is surprised about this hasn't been paying attention for the last years, because this has been developing for years. Vermont's at a point where it needs to decide if it actually believes we need a robust state college system. I believe we do, and I think we need to start by asking, who do the Vermont state colleges serve? Disproportionately, the students in the Vermont state colleges are from Vermont. Disproportionately, they're the first in their families to go to college. Many of them are part-time students because they need to work while they're going to college. And we need to design a system that works for them. And we need to design a system that makes sure that they have opportunities to get the skills they need to move into good jobs in Vermont. So I believe, and right after we heard this announcement this time, I put out a proposal. It's on our website. You can go to our website, RebeccaHolcomb.com, scroll down in news, and you'll see my recommended proposal for taking action right now on the state college system. I think we need to start by committing to bridge funding to get them through the current year, but with strings attached. We need to insist that there be a plan by January for how that system will be viable and meet the needs of Vermont students moving forward in a permanent way. We need to fully rethink the total state college system, not just Northern Vermont University, but also the state college system and the facilities for the CCV, to figure out how we can take the best of each of them and make a system that's flexible, but also sustainably sized so that we can meet the needs of Vermonters and do so in a way that's robust. And we also need to look at cross-sector collaborations. Let's just take Northern Vermont University in Linden. There's a NVU campus in Linden. There's a CCV campus in St. Johnsbury, and there are 2 schools that each run separate career and technical education programs that provide very good, very high quality career training for kids. We also have adult education and Department of Labor programs. We need to start thinking together across sectors about how we can collaborate in ways that make sure we have robust opportunities for people to better themselves in every part of our state. And that means thinking across sectors and taking seriously how we make this system sustainable into the future.
Thank you, Rebecca. Just a note for those of you who are on Facebook and those of you who are in Zoom, we are capturing the chat questions. So even if we don't get to your question, please continue putting your questions down. We will share those with the candidates so that they're aware of what your concerns are. So your questions, even if we don't get them to them tonight, they will be seen by the candidates. On that, I'd like to transition us briefly, or not briefly, but for a bit, to the issue of economic development, which is a big issue around the state and for us, particularly in Windham County. Other than promoting broadband, we realize broadband is very important and very popular. What policies will you promote that will encourage economic job growth in Vermont, with a particular emphasis on increasing diversity and attracting new residents while still encouraging current residents to remain in the state? And David, we have not given you a chance to start one of these question sets, so we'll go ahead and start with David and go to Rebecca and then on to Patrick.
Thank you, John. You know, I came to Vermont to go to higher education, and I chose to stay because of the community, the energy, the spirit, the attention that actually small business owners like myself, who is starting a farm, got and received. We have a lot of things that we can do to sell Vermont to folks both in Vermont to stay and out-of-staters to come and invest. But we have a governor that chooses to talk about the downsides of Vermont far more than the benefits. Our local regional development commissions, our state agency of commerce and community development, local nonprofits, all work with people to help folks thrive in small business settings. And we need to really market that of all the possibilities that we have. You've talked about broadband, so I won't go into the details, but if we have broadband, that also expands those opportunities for economic development in our rural areas. We have a range of opportunities. We need to invest in perpetually affordable housing. One of the things that's a real challenge in our state is our cost of living, but our cost of living is actually average for New England. In other parts of the country, we would be one state. And the reality is the economies of Boston and Connecticut and New York make it so that those folks buying up here make our costs go way up. We need to invest in perpetually affordable housing so that Vermonters can stay in Vermont. That's the best investment we can make to keep them here, along with investing in childcare and those creative opportunities in our schools. We also have to redouble down on investments in renewable energy. We've lost 500 jobs from small businesses all across Vermont in solar installation. We need to say that's the wrong way to go, both to tackle our climate crisis and to create jobs throughout rural Vermont. We need to invest in the opportunities for local, diversified, renewable energy, for resilience, and for our economy. We also need to weatherize homes in Vermont all across the state for our seniors and for our working class Vermonters to lower their bills and protect the environment. Again, investing in those projects and infrastructure both make jobs and save people money that they can then spend in their local community. Obviously, I'm very in touch with our agricultural economy. The agricultural economy can both sequester carbon and help us with the climate crisis through cover crops and turning those in to build organic matter in our soil. That'll reduce water pollution runoff from our fields, and we will build a more resilient local economy around agriculture that makes us in a much better position when we look at issues like the global pandemic is exposing. Saying and doing these investments will both create jobs for Vermonters and will draw people to Vermont, particularly in the southern four counties, particularly Windham County. So those are some of the ideas that I would bring to the governor's office.
Thank you, David. Rebecca.
Hi. Thank you. This is where I get to benefit from going after David, because this is actually an issue on which I think we agree on many, many issues. And there are a couple, I'll just get the opportunity to add some nuance. You know, we talk a lot about people leaving the state of Vermont, but when we look at who's actually leaving, they tend to be people who are earning between $50,000 and $70,000 a year. These are people who are working hard and they just can't figure out how to make ends meet here. We need to figure out how to make this a place where Vermonters can stay and raise their kids. And I've spent a lot of time this last month, since obviously there's not a lot of in public campaigning, speaking to business owners in different communities and asking them, what is it that we need to do to help get Vermont back on her feet? And what they say is we need to invest in a green future and we need to invest in Vermont and in Vermonters. You know, when we talk to Governor Scott, he says over and over again, the answer is just cuts. We just have to keep cutting. I don't think we can cut our way to prosperity. I'm a co-owner of a small inn. If I don't buy mattresses, nobody will come and stay in my inn. And as David said, we need to be able to make strategic investments in basic 21st infrastructure that allow us to build affordable housing and make sure people can telecommute. But we also have to think about how in every sector we are using our dollars to strengthen Vermont institutions and sell Vermont. First of all, as Secretary of Education for over 4 years, I saw that every dollar our schools spent on farm to school, buying food from Vermont farms, not only gave our kids the best food we could give them, but it also had an additional 60 cents of value in the Vermont economy, because those farmers then pay income taxes and go buy goods and services from other Vermonters. That's why we need to invest in our Vermont farms. We need to do the same thing with clean energy. Right now, we send about $1.5 billion a year out of state on fossil fuels. We can do good work and use the purchasing power of government to support community creation of renewable energy here in Vermont communities, so that we're hiring Vermonters in good high-wage jobs to solve some of our problems and keeping those dollars right here. I also mentioned the same with healthcare. I believe in this state. And the other thing you mentioned in the initial questions, which I have to address, we have to learn to welcome people who are new to the state. And that's because the vibrancy and opportunity that they bring to our communities is going to be part of our economic transition. We need to celebrate these people, because here's the truth. Just a few statistics from Chittenden County. New Americans in particular bring extraordinary vibrancy to our economy. They're younger, they're more likely to be employed, and they're more likely to go to college. They represent only about 8% of our population in Chittenden County, but 14% of employees in the manufacturing sector. We need to attract young people, because that's how we're going to build a strong future for Vermont. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Patrick, Pat, I'm sorry, I keep calling you Patrick. Pat.
Well, my daughter Sunrise grew up in Manchester, and she, when it came time for her to move on and get a further education, there was really not much for her in Vermont in terms of her opportunities. And she went to Brooklyn, and she there developed a successful vegan cookie business, and also became a very accomplished photographer. And a lot of her materials have been on covers of magazines, PR Week and other types of magazines like that. And she really didn't have the opportunity when she was leaving Vermont to look at anything beyond that. And so what I think that Vermont needs to do is to create those kinds of opportunities, education and otherwise, that will bring people back to Vermont. My daughter has agreed to come back to be my campaign manager. And part of the problem that she sees in Vermont is the way that Vermont is perceived. Vermont, unfortunately, is perceived as a white state. And there is no diversity, at least in terms of the perception that people have of Vermont. And it's not something that is very appealing to the younger people, and causes them not to really want to relocate back to Vermont. I love having my daughter back to Vermont. I hope she stays, and we'll see how that goes. But we need more opportunities for our young people.
Okay, thank you. We have had a number of questions asking about low-income individuals. How do we get affordable housing for working class or low-income people? Even prior to COVID-19, Windham County is a good example. We had a very low unemployment rate. There were a lot of help wanted signs out on the streets for jobs. And yet residents of Brattleboro or residents of this area could hold down multiple jobs and still not be able to afford the housing in the local area that they need to be able to get to those jobs. So I'm curious how you as candidates, because this issue is just going to persist through the pandemic and after, how do we support low-income Vermonters, working class Vermonters in this era with unacceptably high housing costs? And David, if you want to start on that one, that'd be great.
Sure. I've been talking about a Green Mountain New Deal for quite some time, and that would be to recapture even just half of the Trump tax cuts that went to the wealthiest 5% of Vermonters. That would allow us about $100 to $120 million a year to invest in the vision and the future of Vermont that we want. If we were to put $20 million a year, 4 or 5 years in a row, into building perpetually affordable housing in our town and village centers, that would go a long way. A couple of years ago, the legislature passed a bond that I think was about $33 or $35 million, and it leveraged almost $200 million in housing dollars to build affordable housing across Vermont. So if we were to do 20 million a year, 4 and 5 years in a row, we could build $600 or $700 million of affordable housing that would make it possible for Vermonters to be here. If we do not build affordable housing with those restrictions on it that wouldn't allow it to just go to market rates, that would be the foundation for working class Vermonters. Because ultimately, our wages, which also need to go up by increasing the minimum wage, we need to do paid family leave, we need to work on universal health care. These are all the combination of issues that result in families in that $50,000 to $70,000 category not being able to live here. That's also true with affordable childcare. So we need to make the investment. We need to look at where the money has been concentrated over the last 40 years, which is in the wealthiest folks' hands. We need to address the issue that 100,000 Vermonters living paycheck to paycheck have been calling my office saying, I can't make it right now. The unemployment system isn't working. We need to make a system in our state, an economic system, that makes it so that folks are not living on that edge. And one of the key ways to do that is to invest in affordable housing, the foundation of economic stability for all Vermonters.
Thank you, David. Rebecca?
This is another issue that when I've spoken to business leaders and community leaders, it comes up again and again. And what they say is the right answer to get access to affordable housing is going to be different in different parts of the state. Some communities don't even have basic capacity for municipal wastewater and sewage treatment in their downtowns. You cannot put in high quality, affordable, carbon-friendly housing at scale without access to wastewater treatment. And Vermont has not invested in infrastructure this way for years. So what may make sense in some communities is those first primary investments, which will make it possible for people to build that housing. Other communities may have different first steps. And as governor, I will work with people. How we fund it, we absolutely do see that this COVID money is coming down. We don't know what it will be used for, but this might be a place that we could think about strengthening our communities. We know we have a shortage of housing, and we know it's at the heart of so many problems. It's why some people can't leave the prison system, because even though they're eligible for release, they can't get out because there is no appropriate housing. It's why Phil Scott and his administration just turned housing vouchers back to the federal government, because they can't figure out how to pair housing with supportive services. We need to turn into this because it's costing us. And I talked to business leader after business leader who says that when they try to bring people to Vermont to work, they can't hire because there's no place for people to live. So this is something we have to do. And just to be clear, not all debt is the same. Bonds are different for housing, because when we build a house, people move here and then they pay income tax. That's an investment that pays for itself. It's not like debt associated with pensions, which is debt for goods and services we've already consumed, because over the past 20 years, people in Montpelier didn't do their piece and fully fund our pension obligations. So this is an opportunity to invest in housing in ways that make it possible for people to move into our Vermont communities, reduce their need to commute, and be able to live well and take jobs.
Thank you, Rebecca. Pat?
Well, we need an affordable housing, and it's a matter of investment. And one of the ways that we can afford affordable housing is to tax pot. I mean, if it's going to be legal, then it ought to be taxed, just like wine or beer or liquor. And it's one of the sources of funding that I think that hasn't really been looked at carefully enough and hasn't really been fully appreciated. Taxes are high and everybody complains about them, but if you tax pot, it's going to have an offset on the burden that people have to deal with in Vermont. And another issue that hasn't been fully addressed either is the employers need workers, and we need immigrants. We need people who are legally here, who have been vetted properly, to come here and work and to do the jobs that need to be done. They're good people. My ancestors are immigrants. I'm sure everybody who's listening, their ancestors came from somewhere else, and they could really give a boost to the economy and to the tax base, and the fact that the Vermont is getting older and we need more people. And I think that that's an important issue that really needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Pat. So tonight we were going to stick to just 3 topic areas, which were the healthcare COVID issue, education, and economic development. That's so that you will have the opportunities in future debates to discuss other issues in more in depth as well. So I want to wrap up tonight with one final question and before we move to closing comments. And that has to do with the state budget. Probably the first thing that you as governor are going to have to deal with is this enormous budget gap that's going to exist when you come into office. For everything that you've presented, there is clearly a budgetary impact. And I'm wondering how you as the governor are going to address that budget shortfall and what your large strategic plan is. And we'll go ahead and start with Rebecca on this one.
So thank you for bringing this up, because this is where we need to be thoughtful about what we actually can afford. And I want to promise what's possible. And we know that already we're looking at a budget deficit of at least 50 million. Part of what's happening this year is it's too late to make savings. And so people are going to use mandatory statutory reserves to help cover some of the costs of the current year. And we'll have to pick up responsibility for dealing with that next year. We also know that the federal aid has not been as flexible as people would have hoped. It is benefiting certain kinds of businesses and perhaps not the businesses, nor frankly the individuals who are most adversely affected by COVID-19. So we do have some significant challenges. And what I have said repeatedly is we are going to have to do across state government what we had to do in education. When I came into the education agency, we had a 40% cut in state funding already. And I had to learn how to rethink our operations because no one in the legislature took work off our plate. So we had to figure out what could we standardize and what could we do as efficiently as possible by putting in new systems so that we could free time for what needed to be done elsewise. That's what the public schools have been doing. They've been dealing with the reality that our state colleges are now beginning to face, and which our hospitals, frankly, have to face as well, which is we have fewer people and we have a lot of infrastructure. And we're going to have to make very smart, very collaborative choices about how we work together to focus on what's a priority and to use resources better. The reason I mentioned the childcare issue in public schools is we have some communities where we have an acute shortage of childcare. And we also know that we put $60 to $80 million more in childcare in 2018. And we lost about a quarter of our childcare capacity statewide. We cannot keep doing things the way we've always done them. We need to be able to look for opportunities across sectors to share infrastructure and work together to make ends meet and focus on the most critical priorities for Vermonters. That means investing in Vermont, not sending our dollars out of state, and investing in Vermonters so that they can go out and create the wealth and opportunity our Vermont deserves.
Thank you, Rebecca. Pat, would you like to go next, please?
Sure. The federal government has to fulfill their promises. And, we are tired of unfunded mandates. It's fine for the federal government to tell us the things that we need to do and things that we need to fund and how we should do things. But if they're not going to fund if there are going to be unfunded mandates, then we really are going to have a real problem. One of the issues that I have brought up is that we need a new deal. We need to reshuffle the deck. The cards were dealt out in the 19th century and in the 20th century. We need to reshuffle and redeal the deck. And to turn the cards face up, have a deliberative process, but then get things done, and to do the things that the Vermonters need to have done. And I think that there are a lot of really good ideas, but I think these are other things that really should be considered and be considered very seriously.
Thank you, Pat. David?
Thank you, John. A couple different things. First, I would say that I'm going to work collaboratively with the legislature and people in Montpelier, because they actually come back into your communities and are a reflection of who you are. So I'm not going to attack the legislature for past mistakes and past challenges. I'm going to work with them looking forward about how we can tackle these challenges. I see a number of legislators and former legislators on this conversation. And I think they've been working really hard in your community, and many of you really like your current legislators and think they've been fighting on your behalf, and they have been. So it's really important to be collaborative with the legislature and not just point the finger at it. As someone who's been now both in the legislature and sort of, but not really in the administration, I think that's an important relationship to build on rather than tear down. I would say with respect to the budget, we have an opportunity with the CARES Act money. There are great restrictions on it, but we have over $1 billion that we can utilize to strengthen our economy in the rebuild and expenses from COVID-19 situation. We can build out that broadband, which would be hundreds and hundreds of jobs across the state, both putting that in, but then also circulating that money in the economy. We can also look at creative ideas. I've been talking with a legislator and folks in nonprofits about what if the state were to buy food from, currently it's the commercial market because most farms don't have food yet to sell, bring it to restaurants, put them to work producing meals for people all over the state who are in need of food and work collaboratively with the food shelves to then put restaurant workers back to work and restaurant owners using their facilities and helping pay their bills so that when we come out of the COVID situation, when we have a vaccine, when we have herd immunity, we can get going without having lost as many businesses as we're going to lose if we don't keep them afloat right now with creative financing of that $1 billion. Then we also need to work either with the federal government again and our great delegation to Washington, who are working on a municipal and state funded bill, which is the next bill, to help just like we did with the Recovery Act in 2008 and 2009. So yes, we have about a $500 million projected shortfall in the next fiscal year. Some of that will be federal money, and the question is, how do we use it? And we use it by putting it into the hands at the bottom of the economic ladder so that it is spent over and over and over again in the economy. That's the best way to build an economy, is from the bottom up, and that's the best way to rebuild it. And we need to rebuild it with that kind of vision, whether it's farm to restaurant to hunger issues, and collaborate across multiple spectrums. I really appreciated Rebecca's comment about farm to school. I was chair of agriculture when we passed that bill, working with farmers and hunger individuals and teachers and educators back when we passed that legislation. It's that collaborative work with Vermonters and with the legislature and with the administration that will help build us out from under this economic situation that we're going to find ourselves in.
Okay. Thank you, David. So a reminder to those of you who are watching this live or are watching the recording of this after, all three candidates, we will be posting their websites and their contact information on our platform, so you can follow up with them with additional questions. And as I said, we'll be copying the chat questions that we have and sending them along as well. So any comments presented will be of use, I'm sure, to all of the candidates. I'd like to thank you, all three of you, for joining us tonight before we move into the closing statements. It is a real pleasure to hear so many good ideas. I think we as Democrats have policies. They have been proven to be effective. Where the governor has been effective in responding to the pandemic, he's been so by using policies Democrats have always believed should have been in place all along. So as someone once said to me, he might have vetoed paid family leave, but he's almost essentially had to put it in place now. So thank you for your thoughts. I wanted to go ahead with closing statements. And David, since you started with the opening statement, you can start with the closing, and then we'll go to Pat, and then Rebecca will have the final word. Please go ahead.
Well, a few things. Thank you, of course, for hosting this and the many, many folks that have participated and watched. It's great to have a conversation that we would like to be having in person, but I appreciate so many people attending in this difficult time. I hope folks are staying safe and healthy, and we will continue to do wise measures as we open up again, because we have to wash our hands and wear our masks and do the things to protect others. So I really appreciate everyone's effort in that regard and being here for this debate and discussion. It's no secret that the coronavirus, the meme out there is that it's made Governor Scott harder to beat. But I actually have heard from thousands of Vermonters who are very angry, particularly around the unemployment system, who have said to me, I voted for him before, I'm not going to vote for him again. I'm familiar with you, you're a farmer, you're a business owner, I'm going to support you in this election. Outside of that unemployment fiasco, while Governor Scott has done a reasonably good job, people know that his reasonable good job is reactive, it's not proactive. when he shut down people's work, he needed to be thinking ahead about the unemployment situation. With me as your governor, you're going to have someone thinking ahead and planning for those challenges, not just reacting to them. It's one thing when the economy's good and you can coast along. It's another when there's a challenge. You need vision and creativity. So many of the policies he scoffed at or delayed or vetoed: minimum wage, paid family leave, broadband, and even cannabis reform, which many people already know I've been a leader on for 20 years, have been things that would have helped Vermont and Vermont's economy. And those background issues actually would have put us in a much better position going into this COVID crisis. We need to beat Scott so that the real policies that help Vermonters get implemented in the coming years as we make our way out of this crisis. I have listened to Vermonters for 20 years. I have worked with Vermonters. I've traveled down to Brattleboro and Putney and many communities in your county, particularly around GMOs, but around minimum wage, marriage equality, many, many issues, including the schools bill. And that is the approach I will take as a governor. I won't just come down there during campaigns. I will continue to come down, as I have as lieutenant governor, to work with Vermonters where you are and not expect you all to be able to get to Montpelier to participate. I've also won statewide office twice. And in this day and age, beating the governor means having familiarity and connections with Vermonters all across the state. Little known fact, in 2018, I actually got 7,000 more votes than Governor Scott. I am best positioned to take him on and beat him, especially in the COVID-19 epidemic, because of that familiarity that Vermonters want with their elected officials. I ask for your support. I would like you to know that the organizational work together with you, we can rebuild our economy with jobs that pay a fair wage for everyone. We can build affordable housing. We can support our seniors. We can actually boost our educational facilities into those community centers. Working collaboratively, we can tackle many of these issues. We do have to welcome new Vermonters. We also have to support longtime Vermonters, and we have to make sure all are welcome, and we have to recognize our true Vermonters, the indigenous Vermonters who have been here before most of us on this call. We have to be an inclusive state where all are welcome. And if we do that with open arms and embrace people that want to be here, that choose to be here and are born here, we'll have a strong and brilliant future. I ask you to visit my website, zuckermanforvt.com. You can find out more about my issues. You can find out more about the campaign and how you can help. And I look forward to your support through the primary and the general election to put Vermont into a new direction with vision for the future.
Thanks, David. Pat.
Well, I live in southern Vermont, and I have lived here since 1986, and I've spent my time representing the powerless against the powerful. I've tried over 75 jury trials in all over Vermont, but predominantly in southern Vermont. And I've represented people and realize and know how they feel and what their problems are and what sort of feelings that they have. And I've looked at juries, I've looked them in the eye, and I've asked for money because civil suits are primarily over disputes over money. But I only represent plaintiffs. I only represent the people who are on the powerless side against the powerful. And most of them are, and they're all big insurance companies. We've gone to bat in the courtrooms. We've beaten them, and we've gotten justice for our clients. And that's what I intend to do as your governor. And I would also invite you to come by and see me. I'm at 409 Main Street in Bennington County, in Bennington, Vermont, in Bennington County. And stop by, say hello, give me a call, 802-447-0100. Always happy to talk to you. And of course, always check out my website to see all the things that I stand for at winburn2020.com. And by the way, Alfie, who's much better looking, says hello. He's one of my greatest assets in the campaign, and we look forward to seeing you on the campaign trail as soon as that's possible.
Thanks, Pat. And Rebecca, a final word, please.
Thank you, John, and thank you, David, and thank you, Pat. I have to say, it's such a pleasure to be here, and it's such a pleasure to come back to Windham County. I thank all of you who've taken the time over the last couple months to speak with me in person, speak with me on the phone. I've learned so much, and meeting with Vermonters makes me confident that we can make the change we need. And I look forward to doing that for you. As Secretary of Education, I put almost 40,000 miles a year on my car, visiting every single community and hearing from communities and boards about what they cared about. I know that our state is small, but it's also got a lot of diversity across regions. And I know that we need to pay special attention right now to some of the communities outside Chittenden County so that they too can be prosperous and have the opportunities that we see in Chittenden County right now. And I also think that this election is one where we have to defeat Phil Scott. His message of austerity is literally killing opportunity in the state right now. And we need to take him on. That's why I'm running for governor. You know, we talked earlier, David, about how vaccines is a political issue. Saying that Stowe was not merged is a political thing to say because Stowe was merged. We can't do things that divide people, but what we can talk about is serious substantive policy differences that matter. The Anti-Vaccine Coalition in Vermont called you a hero, while parents against preventable infectious diseases opposed your candidacy. This is a serious issue related to electability in the middle of a pandemic. It's not a political issue, it's an electability issue. And let's be honest, nobody who holds that position is going to defeat Phil Scott in 2020 in the middle of a deadly pandemic. We need to defeat Phil Scott. This election is about how we work together to respond to the biggest health crisis. And it's also about how we come out of this health crisis with a robust public health system, a hospital that works for all, a system that works for all, and an economy that is fair, sustainable, and resilient. As Secretary of Education, those were my hallmarks, and I will bring that to being governor of the state as well. Thank you so much to everybody who has joined me, and let's go forward. And I look forward to taking this campaign out once we're able to come out and off this trail. If you look in the links that are going up, you'll see a link to our website. I know that John has also shared that. I look forward to having further conversations with you. Feel free to reach out to us at rebecca@rebeccaholcomb.com. I've learned so much from talking to people like you, and I look forward to using your ideas to make my campaign stronger as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you to all of our candidates for sharing your ideas and perspectives tonight. And thank you to everyone on Zoom and on Facebook for participating in our first attempt at I think, a very successful debate, a virtual debate. As we move towards this November election, we need to continue sharing these ideas and these perspectives. It is important that we continue these conversations, and we in Windham County want to do that, our Windham County Democrats. And just like our candidates, we have a Facebook page as well. It's at Windham Democrats, and we have a website, which is windhamvotes.com. And please visit us if you'd like to help us as we make sure we have Democrats winning up and down the ticket in November. We'd love to have you along. And again, thank you to our candidates. It's been a real pleasure moderating this debate with all three of you. And I don't know if I can say have a safe drive home because I think everyone's already home. So, but thanks all, and have a good evening.
Thank you,
John.
John. Thank you, appreciate it.
Thanks, John, Pat, Rebecca, great job.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, guys.